The humid air of a Fayetteville Friday night was thick with the usual sounds of a bustling military town, but inside Luigi's Italian restaurant, the atmosphere was one of warmth and family. Laughter drifted over plates of pasta as the clock ticked toward 10, a typical evening for the Parrous family and their loyal patrons. Nobody noticed the black truck pulling into the parking lot, nor the young man stepping out, clad in shorts and a fishing vest that concealed a deadly intent. Within minutes, the clinking of silverware would be replaced by the deafening roar of a shotgun, and a sanctuary of comfort would be transformed into a labyrinth of terror that would leave a permanent scar on the heart of North Carolina. Remember to comment, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss future episodes of the Calendar of Crime. Fayetteville, in 1993, was a city defined by the shadow of Fort Bragg, one of the largest military installations in the world. It was a place where the buzz of transport planes and the sight of soldiers in fatigues were as common as the pine trees lining the roads. Luigi's, located on McPherson Church Road, was more than just a restaurant. It was a local institution owned by Pete and Ethel Parrous, Greek immigrants who had spent decades building a life and a community. It was the kind of place where the owners knew your name and treated every customer like a guest in their own home, a peaceful enclave in a town that was often bracing for the next deployment. The political climate of the early 90s was fraught with tension, particularly within the ranks of the U.S. military. President Bill Clinton had recently proposed lifting the long-standing ban on gay and lesbian service members, a move that sparked intense debate and resentment among traditionalists. At Fort Bragg, this tension was palpable, felt in the barracks and the local hangouts, where soldiers gathered to blow off steam. For some, the changing social landscape felt like a betrayal of the values they had sworn to uphold, creating a volatile mixture of political grievance and personal frustration that was simmering just beneath the surface of daily duty. 22-year-old Kenneth Junior French was a sergeant in the 82nd Airborne Division, a mechanic who had earned his stripes, but was struggling with demons that few of his fellow soldiers saw. Behind his military bearing lay a history of family trauma, rooted in a childhood marked by a violent and abusive father. Friends described him as a man who could be kind and helpful one moment, but deeply troubled the next. On the surface, he was a soldier doing his job, but internally, he was a pressure cooker of resentment, fueled by a perceived loss of control over his world and the institutions he served. August 6, 1993, began as an unremarkable day for French, but it quickly spiraled into a haze of intoxication and dark obsession. After a night of heavy drinking that lasted until the early morning hours, he spent his Friday watching and rewatching the Clint Eastwood film, The Unforgiven. He sat in his trailer, drinking beer and whiskey, reportedly imitating the cold-blooded shooting scenes from the movie. During the day, he made erratic phone calls to his mother and an ex-girlfriend, crying about his inability to protect his sister from their father's abuse, his mind fractured by a toxic blend of past trauma and present intoxication. As the sun set, French's behavior became increasingly alarming to those who crossed his path. He was seen driving erratically, clutching a bottle of wild turkey and shouting racial slurs at children. He told a friend he wanted to go to a part of town to kill people. His speech slurred, but his intent focused. He loaded 2 12-gauge shotguns and a .22 caliber rifle into his truck, weapons he had legally acquired but was now preparing to use for a massacre. The transition from a troubled soldier to a mass murderer was complete as he pulled out of his driveway and headed toward the lights of McPherson Church Road. The first shots rang out not in the restaurant but in the parking lot near a Kroger supermarket. French stepped out of his truck and fired indiscriminately toward the store, the sudden blasts shattering the evening quiet and sending shoppers diving for cover. He didn't stop to see the confusion he had caused. Instead, he turned his attention toward the back of Luigi's. Carrying a pump-action shotgun and draped in his fishing vest, he moved with a chilling purpose, bypassing the front entrance to slip through the kitchen doors, where the staff was busy preparing the final orders of the night. The horror began in the kitchen, where the first victim, a cook named Willie McCormick, looked up to see a man with a shotgun. Without a word, French opened fire, hitting McCormick as he tried to scramble away. The sound of the blast and the smell of gunpowder instantly alerted the rest of the staff that something was terribly wrong. As McCormick lay wounded, French pushed past the prep tables and into the dining area, his presence a sudden, violent intrusion into the lives of dozens of unsuspecting diners who were just finishing their meals. Stepping into the main dining room, French leveled his weapon and screamed, "Freeze!" at the top of his lungs. The room fell into a stunned silence for a heartbeat before erupting into pure chaos. People dove under tables, scrambled for the exits, and clutched their loved ones as the gunman began to pace through the aisles. Witnesses would later testify that he wasn't just shooting. He was shouting political vitriol, yelling about President Clinton and his policies regarding gays in the military, his eyes wild with a rage that had finally found a target. Pete Parrous, the 73-year-old patriarch of the restaurant, did what he had done for decades. He stepped forward to protect his guests. He approached French, his hands likely raised in a gesture of peace, pleading with the young soldier not to hurt anyone. But there was no reasoning with the man behind the trigger. French fired at point-blank range, killing Pete instantly in front of his customers and his family. As Pete fell, his wife Ethel stood up, her screams of grief cut short by a second fatal blast. In an instant, the heart of Luigi's had been torn out, leaving their daughter Connie to witness the unthinkable. The carnage continued as French moved through the booths, his actions marked by a terrifying lack of mercy. James Kidd, a 46-year-old father, was dining with his son Patrick when the shooting started. Without hesitation, James threw his body over his son, shielding the boy from the rain of lead. He took the full force of the blast, sacrificing his life so that his child might live to see another day. Patrick would later recall the terrifying silence that followed the shots, the weight of his father's protection being the only thing between him and the gunman's wrath. In another part of the restaurant, 26-year-old Wesley Scott Cover showed a similar, selfless bravery. He was tending to a fellow patron who had been grazed by a pellet when he saw French approaching. Knowing a pregnant woman was nearby, Wesley stood his ground, pleading for her safety and trying to draw the gunman's attention away from the vulnerable. His reward for his heroism was a fatal shot to the head. Wesley died as he lived, putting the needs of others before his own, a final act of courage in a room filled with cowardice and cruelty. The response from law enforcement was swift, born from the proximity of officers who were working off-duty nearby. Lieutenant Bill Simons, who was at the Kroger next door, heard the gunfire and immediately called for backup before rushing toward the sound of the slaughter. He entered the restaurant, to a scene of absolute devastation, the air thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. He didn't hesitate, knowing that every second he waited was another life potentially lost to the man stalking the aisles with a shotgun. Simons confronted French, the center of the restaurant, a tense standoff in the middle of the wreckage. As French turned his weapon toward the officer, Simons fired, hitting the gunman and bringing him to the floor. Other officers swarmed the building, securing the perimeter and disarming French as he lay wounded. The transition from active shooter to prisoner happened in a blur of blue lights and shouted commands, finally bringing an end to the 15 minutes of terror that had claimed 4 lives and shattered dozens more. In the wake of the shooting, Fayetteville was a city in mourning, struggling to understand how one of its own could turn so violently against the community. French was taken to the hospital under heavy guard, his wounds non-life-threatening, but his future now bound to the legal system. The survivors were left to grapple with the physical and emotional scars, while the families of the 4 deceased prepared for funerals that should never have happened. Luigi's, once a place of joy, was now a crime scene, its walls pockmarked by pellets and floors stained with the blood of heroes. The trial of Kenneth Junior French brought the full scope of his motives into the public eye. His defense team argued that he was suffering from a blackout brought on by extreme intoxication and the long-term effects of childhood trauma. They pointed to his father's history of abuse as the root of his rage. However, the prosecution focused on the premeditated nature of the attack, citing his political outbursts and the deliberate way he had armed himself. The jury heard testimony about his hatred for the changing military culture, painting a picture of a man who chose a public stage to air his private grievances. Ultimately, the jury found French guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 8 counts of assault. While the prosecution sought the death penalty, the jury deadlocked on the sentence, leading the judge to impose 4 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 35 years for the assaults. It was a sentence that ensured Kenneth French would never again walk free, but for the families of the victims, it offered only a cold kind of justice. The man who had sought to make a political statement had instead left a legacy of senseless pain and broken families. Today, the memory of that night lives on in Fayetteville, a reminder of the fragility of peace and the profound impact of individual heroism. A memorial stands as a testament to Pete, Ethel, James, and Wesley, 4 people who, in the face of absolute darkness, showed the very best of the human spirit. Luigi's eventually reopened, continuing the legacy of the Parrous family, but the echoes of August 6, 1993, remain a part of the city's history, a somber chapter in the calendar of crime that serves as a warning of what happens when hatred is allowed to fester unchecked. The story of the Luigi's restaurant shooting is not just one of a gunman and his weapons, but of a community that refused to be defined by his violence. It is the story of a father's love, a stranger's courage, and the enduring strength of a family that lost everything but their name. As we look back on those 15 minutes of horror, we are reminded that even in the darkest moments, there are those who will step into the light to protect others, ensuring that the names of the victims are remembered long after the name of their killer has faded into infamy. Thanks for watching. Please comment, share, like, and subscribe for future episodes from the Calendar of Crime.